Welcome, everybody, to our Utah League of Cities and Towns Board of Directors meeting. Today is November 15th, and it is 12:04. I think it'll be easier if maybe Nick does the roll call or Carson maybe, because it just, as far as introductions, so we know who's on the call.
Yep, perfect, Mayor. We'll have Nick do that right now.
Okay.
Excellent. So obviously we have Mayor Cabusi, we have Council Member Winch, we have Council Member, and they always move on me. We have Mayor Jessup, we have Council Member Dugan, we have Mayor Silvestrini, we have Mayor Johnson, we have Mayor Randall, we have Mayor Wright, we have Seth Perrins from Spanish Fork, and then we have our new reporter, Pamela Spencer from Vineyard, who's representing the Clerks and Reporters Association. We also have Mayor Peterson, who I'm promoting the panelists now. And Roger Tu is also a ex officio board member. So those are our board members in attendance. And in person, we have Councilmember Bradshaw and Mayor Tran.
Okay, is that everyone, Nick?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. This is my first time doing it Zoom, and I don't love it. I'm an in-person type of person, so I'm glad some people are there. Let's go ahead and get started. Our first action item is to review and approve the minutes. So I need someone that could make a motion for that.
Jeff Silvestrini, I'll make a motion to approve the minutes from our last board meeting.
Great, we have a motion.
Michelle Randall, second.
Perfect, we have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call it to a vote. All in favor, say aye.
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 All right, motion carries. Let's move on to our next item. I'm going to call for the conflict of interest disclosure. Does anybody have any issues or conflicts that we need to talk about recusing themselves? Or I don't know, Nick, you tell me if you see any hands up or anything.
I do not.
Perfect. Then let's move forward. Thank you, everyone. The next item that is an action item is the OPMA training. What I need you to do is just know that as myself as the board chair, I am going to certify that the members of our board have received the OPMA training through their individual municipalities and ask for a motion to approve the certification. So does
We have a motion from Councilmember Bradshaw.
Second.
And we had a second from Mayor Tran in person as well.
Perfect. All right. So is there any discussion on the OPMA training certification? We've all probably got it memorized.
Yeah,
And if
Mayor,
not-
just thank you for not having us have to do it like a fourth or fifth time.
No, I was just going to state, and if you haven't, we're not going to take the time to do it. There's a link on the state website. You can do it yourself. So, all right. So I need a vote on this. So all in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, the motion carries. That's great. Thank you, everybody. I think that takes care of the administrative items and the action items. At this point, we'll move to item number 3, which is the resolution appointing authorized individuals for the state of Utah PTIF accounts, and Nick Jarvis will take this.
Excellent. Thank you, Mayor. You will see in your packet a resolution that we are titling Board Resolution 2023 A001, and the A is for administrative. Because this is an internal resolution that we are required to submit to the treasurer to list the names of the folks who are allowed to interact with the PTIF account. We had a master account previous to this that the password has expired on, so we need to get this in. So we actually have someone who can move stuff around. Yeah. We have Cameron, myself, who actually does most of the interaction with the PTIF, and also our financial oversight consultant, David Sanderson, who we're listing as the 3 folks who are authorized to do that. Following approval of this resolution, and part of this resolution is giving Cameron the authority to be the one who signs and submits this to the treasurer's office. We'll take this second page, have it notarized and submit it to the treasurer's office once this is approved. And happy to answer any questions around that.
Are there any questions for Nick?
I'm not seeing any online.
Okay, then we need a motion to approve.
I move to Jeff Silverstein. I move to approve the PTF signatories.
I second.
that.
Excellent.
All right, is there any discussion? Seeing none, we'll call it to a vote. All in favor, say aye.
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 All right.
And any opposed? Perfect, the motion carries. That takes us to our hot topic, item number 4. So this is the housing policy update, and the ULCT advocacy team will take this. And so I think this goes to Cam, correct?
Yep, we Cam and Justin will be tag teaming this with other staffers chiming in. So thank you, everybody, for being willing to do this call. Timing really was essential because yesterday the housing audit, Utah Housing Policy, a case for statewide strategic planning and accountability, was released. I'm going to let Justin give the overview of what happened yesterday. Mayor Tran and Mayor Silvestrini were in the room, and then I'm sure others were listening online. So I'll let Justin walk through that. What we need to accomplish in the next 45 minutes or so, and we are more or less time certain with the close because committees start up again at 1:15, and this is on a committee agenda, and we will be responding to it. Is we will be asking you a Slido question later in the meeting around the recommendations that came out of the audit, to have you share with us which ones are causing concern and which ones are most comfortable based on the information herein. So I'm going to give it to Justin to walk through what happened yesterday, and then we'll come back to talk about next steps.
All right, and Nick, if you can share the screen, let's go to the legislative auditor's website. So let's jump to the next tab. And the one that's perfectly hidden.
Yeah.
All right, so if you go to oag.utah.gov, you can see the full report on the website, as well as a summary of quick facts and the presentation that the auditors made yesterday in the committee. So just as a review, we saw that this audit was on the dashboard during the previous legislative sessions. We saw this last February. And Molly and Carson and I went and met with the auditors all the way back in February, and I've had several subsequent meetings with them. We've hinted at some of this, what's in this audit. The way the legislative audits work is that, as I'm sure people have realized now, they don't get released until the day of the audit when the meeting begins. And those that are read in, we have to sign a statement that says we can't share this, we can't talk about it, we can't do anything with it. So we have been read into various drafts of this report for a few weeks now. The one thing we can say about previous drafts, because we had to delete them all, including the emails that are in them, is that the final draft is quite a bit different than earlier drafts. So the legislative auditors did take quite a bit of feedback, both technical and tonal, in what the final product was. So we can't ever show you previous drafts to say, here's what it did say and here's what it says now, but you'll just have to take our word for it that this final read is not as uncomfortable as earlier reads were. So I want to just talk about, and Nick, if you can scroll up on that to the findings. So the legislative auditors presented to the legislative audit subcommittee yesterday, which is basically made up of House and Senate leadership. The Senate President and House Speaker are on there. Majority Leader, Minority Leader are in there. And they presented this. And these are the quick findings. One, time is running short to accelerate action on housing supply. So they looked at a time frame going to 2050 and said that if we don't get more housing, if we don't find a way to build more housing and build it a little bit more densely, we're going to run out of space in Davis County and Salt Lake County by 2050, was one of their findings. There was questions asked about other places that could look at, but basically the gist is we need more room and we don't have any. Utah should adopt state level measures and targets for housing needs and construction was their other finding, and we'll talk about some of our response to that. But the basic takeaway from the auditor's perspective on this one is nobody knows what the goal is. And I think we can have some agreement with that the comparison I've been using right now, it's like we're taking tests and we're getting homework, but nobody actually knows what the grading criteria is. So they're finding there they need some kind of statewide level or target, more measure or target to measure success against. This third one, the legislature could change local land use regulation to overcome regulatory limits on population growth. They're legislative auditors, so their bend is always towards a legislative solution as opposed to other solutions, and we'll talk a little bit about our response there in a moment. And finally, this is the finding that we are big fans of. Concerns about city compliance with specific requirements and timelines were largely unfounded. So while they have been talking to us since February, we know they've been talking to home builders and developers since February as well. And as they looked into a lot of the complaints that they have, we have in writing now from some state entity that a lot of those concerns are largely unfounded. So that's some positive things there. Nick, can we scroll down to the recommendations?
Sorry, did you need or neener?
We graciously did not need or neener yesterday publicly. Doesn't mean we won't at some point.
You should just point out Lehigh and Springdale were specifically.
So yeah, so Lehigh and Springdale were specifically named when talking about a couple of pieces. I think I can also say without divulging anything, there were more cities named at one point and we pulled back as many as we could. So sorry, Lehigh.
No. So Mayor Johnson, have you had a chance to read the audit? I know I'm putting you on the spot, but.
Well, you are putting me on the spot, and no, because I didn't even know it was out till just before this meeting when I pulled it up from Nick's email this morning.
No worries, just know Lehigh is specifically called out in that section. So the overall finding, we were able to push to a more favorable finding for cities in general, but Lehigh was still specifically referenced because of IADUs. So I just want to make sure you were aware of that.
Were we referenced in a good way then?
No.
Not particularly, no. And you
Okay.
can find it on page 46, I think is your first mention.
I'll get down there. I've got it up now.
Perfect.
So jumping to the recommendations. So every legislative audit has findings, and then the legislative auditors always make recommendations as to things that legislators could do. One of the things you always get from a legislative audit is potential new legislation. So we'll just run through their recommendations and then we'll talk about, again, some of our responses to these. So one, consider requiring the creation of a state level strategic plan in Utah to address current housing shortages and population growth. This goes to that finding that no one really knows what the target is. Second one is consider the range of state level policy options presented in this report to create a program to set and manage state level housing production targets. This is the section, so they looked at other states. Now hold your breath on this one for a second, including California and Oregon, as models of what we could do on housing policy. Everyone digest that for just 1 second. But one of the things that, again, I can't talk too much about this, but they're offering other states up. Montana was another one, and Auckland, New Zealand fell on there. But looking at other places that have done things, but the audit itself did, in fact, mention that none of these policies have been long enough to show whether or not they have been effective. So the audit looked at what is happening in other states, but did not really make a judgment call as to whether or not any of them are effective or should necessarily be adopted, but presented them as options to look at. The third one, consider options to increase zoning density on a wide scale within the state. We'll come back and talk about that one more in depth in a second. Consider policy options to craft additional penalties and incentives associated with housing targets to better ensure local government compliance. Now, we pointed out both in the response and in the letter and in several meetings that there are already penalties out there that we have adopted. There's incentives that are out there. So obviously, this is one that if there were legislation around that, we'd have a lot of discussion about. And finally, as part of the statewide housing strategic planning, consider metrics to better track both actual and potential housing production. We don't know what we don't measure. And again, if we don't know what the targets are and we're not measuring those targets, it's hard for anyone to say we have been successful or not. So that's the quick overview of the audit. So yesterday, the legislative auditors presented. There were some questions asked by the committee. Then Cam and I got up and gave our response to it. We also have a written response in the document itself. So if you go to the last 5 pages of the document, you'll see our written response where we go through the findings and the recommendations point by point and respond in various ways. So with that, Cam, I think I'll let you jump into some of the highlights of the specific responses. But I guess right before we do that, just any quick blush, I guess, reactions from anybody about what you saw or have read so far in the audit.
Mayor Silverstein?
Yeah, so thanks. Mayor Tran and I were there at the hearing, and then actually after the presentation, I had the opportunity to talk about the audit with I guess the lead presenter on the audit and league staff out in the hallway. There are a couple things that I think are important here. First of all, I think there are some real issues with how cursory the analysis is, and particularly what's being done in other states. And really the message is we should have a plan. And my conversation was, we may not have a plan that we've got bullet points or written down, but but for the last 5 or more years, the state and local governments and the development community have been working a plan to try to get better data and move the needle with respect to issues that concern supply of housing and affordability of housing. And frankly, we kind of know what the impediments are with respect to infrastructure and interest rates at this point. But while it might be helpful to have a plan, it's really more important to do things that we have been doing to move the ball forward on this thing. And then secondly, the other thing that I'll say about it is that, that some of their analysis. So, we have this thing in Utah we call the Wasatch Choice Vision. That's at least a Wasatch Front Regional Council concept. And I think that MEG has pretty much adopted that same kind of a philosophy about building centers connected by transit that are more dense, that accommodate the growth. And what this audit found was that if we actually built these centers in the places where they have the acute concerns about the space for growth, Davis County, Salt Lake County, that would work, that we could solve the problem that way. But they said because the Wasatch Choice Vision isn't actually mandatory in a lot of cities' general plans, for our purposes of our analysis, we're just going to ignore it. We're going to ignore the fact that there are communities that are building centers and that that Wasatch Choice concepts are being implemented. We're going to ignore that and draw our conclusions as if that weren't happening, which is really problematic because it is happening. Okay, it's happening in Mill Creek, it's happening in South Jordan, it's happening in Roy, it's happening all over the place. So, but conclusions about this, that we can attack the audit and we can question it, but when you get right down to it, most people are going to just read these recommendations. They're not going to, it's a really heavy lift to like discredit this audit and for things that are problematic with it. I'm not saying we should abandon that idea, but we're going to have to deal with these recommendations like they were written in stone, and so we just kind of have to deal with that landscape. I think do what we can to question it, but be able to address these recommendations. And I think a lot of the response is, look, somebody can write our plan down. We haven't bothered to write it down yet, but we have had a plan and we are implementing it. And there are things that are being done to build more housing. And what we need to really focus on is what are the impediments to ownership and affordability. And I think that we kind of know those right now, at least in this market, given how many units have been entitled but haven't been built. The impediments are interest rates and infrastructure. And so that's state
So Mary,
policy.
so Mary Silvestrini, that's the perfect segue now to where we go from here with these recommendations. In the link that Nick sent yesterday, and Justin referenced it, this is some good news. We were one of 2 entities that were given the opportunity to review the audit in advance and to provide a written response and to provide testimony in committee. There are a lot of entities that are in this space, and the only ones that were given the access, well, I should say there were 2.5 entities. The only ones that were given the access to the entire audit in advance, the Department of Workforce Services and the League. Wasatch Front Regional Council was given a portion of it in advance, but those were and then the Gardner Policy Institute got a portion of it. But in terms of we've had every opportunity to prepare our response, and within the audit document is the League written response that has been quoted liberally by multiple media outlets today, and the Auditor General has expressed their appreciation for the thoughtful response, where we decided as staff strategically we couldn't consult with any elected official. So this was our decision, because again, we were the only ones who were read in. We felt like our best approach was behind the scenes, improve the audit as much as possible, and then use their recommendations to demonstrate what's already happening on the ground and identify potential areas of consensus going forward. So that's what we want to discuss now for the next few minutes. And so Nick, can you just share the screen with the audit document so people can see where the letter is in case they haven't read it yet?
So Cam, I saw Seth's hand up. Does he still want
Oh
to
yeah,
comment?
go ahead, Seth, while Nick's pulling this up.
Mayor Silvestrini got to the point that I was making on some of the data, so he covered it well enough. Thank you.
And I just want to say that we went through it in our office, and we just feel like it's going to be easy for them now to do statewide mandates and with incentives and punishments. And we kind of feel like this is just a major change. The landscape and housing policy, if this sticks to where it is right now, will probably be different for years just based on this one document. It's kind of founded.
Well, America Fuzzy, that's why we've been warning everyone for the last few weeks that we thought this would ignite a new flame in the housing land use space.
I'll just add, Cameron, I think your staff approach to taking their recommendations and showing how we're already doing it is a brilliant move, because whoever they are, I think will expect us to try to fight it and poke holes at it. And I'm not all the way through it, but I got a handful of things I'd like to poke holes in, but I think your approach is the right way to go, because we're part of the solution, and this is what we're already doing. And I think that's going to carry the day to hopefully get rid of some of the things that Mayor Kaufusi's thinking about, which I agree with, and I'm afraid of too. But I loved your approach. I think it was the right one.
Well, thank you, Seth. And just so everyone's aware, Justin, Jared, Carson, and I were the 4 league staffers who were read in. And so we were the ones who put together the response and pushed back internally on many things within the audit, and then strategized on how to respond to it. So what Nick has put up on the screen is our response. We're not going to go through it in great detail due to time, but you all have it. And we did go recommendation by recommendation, finding by finding. So just, here, for example, there's word for word the recommendation with our league response. We were asked by the audit committee yesterday on the record, what is the league's position on these recommendations? And you'll notice as you read through the document, you read through our response, there's not any support or oppose on specific things yet, because nobody had seen them except for league staff. Again, that was strategic on our part. But we also told the audit committee that we were meeting with the board today for your first snapshot at the response or at the audit. So that, Nick, will you stop sharing and allow Carson to share? Because we're gonna pull up Slido question, one big Slido question about each of the, there'll be one question, we'll have all the recommendations in it. And before you respond to the Slido, we're just gonna put it up on the screen so you can see it. But before you start responding, we'll take a moment to just quickly walk through what's there. So there's the Slido link. And hopefully, as you're doing Slido, you can have a copy of the lead response up in front of you, because that provides more detail.
I'll give everybody a moment here to join in, and then I'll open up the question and we can talk about it.
Great. Thank you, Carson. So again, we have 30 minutes. We're gonna do this Slido question, and then we'll give you an important update on the governor's initiative, which the audit has helped inspire. And then a quick update on modular, basically just to check in, because the board gave us direction a couple months ago, and there's a lot of moving pieces there. So, Carson, do you think we're ready? Okay, what you have on the screen, please don't start answering the question yet. What you have on the screen are all of the recommendations from the audit. So Justin went through the findings, the high level findings, and then they summarized the recommendations. So this is word for word, the recommendations from the audit. If you still have the audit in front of you, we are at the back of the audit. It's page 61. This is where the league's response to it is. We're just going to leave this on the screen, but hopefully you can have a copy of the audit with you as we walk through this. We have put all the recommendations in the Slido here, and we are going to ask you in a few moments to rank them in order of most concerning to least concerning, right? It's covered. I want to make sure I'm saying that right. Okay. So most concerning at the top, least concerning at the bottom. Is what we need to know from the board is we've got a meeting with the governor's office tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. And we have committee hearings this afternoon. Like, they're going to be asking for follow-up on the audit. And so we recognize this is not going to be, I mean, we could spend hours on this, but we need to at least get this snapshot from you so we can strategize the next steps. So I'm going to quickly explain what each recommendation is, so to refresh your memory, and then we'll give you a moment to think through.
On the chat, was that Mayor Walker?
Yeah.
I could send this one.
Okay.
Mayor Walker, I'll email that to you.
Thanks.
Okay.
I've just been busy on point stuff. I haven't read it yet, but I'd like to get it.
Yep, no worries. Yeah, it came out moments before they started presenting. So please don't, anybody, please don't fill it out until we walk through each of the recommendations. So recommendation 1.1 is this state level strategic plan. Our written response said we believe a strategic plan that addresses affordable homeownership, housing affordability, infrastructure needs, economic development, and population growth in collaboration with state, local governments, private sector, and residents would be worthwhile. And that the primary target should be affordable home ownership for Utahns and as well as financially sustainable infrastructure and quality of life. So the board principles within recommendation 1.1. In recommendation 1.2, the legislature should consider amending LUDMA to clearly emphasize housing production. This is a little weedy. So really, if you look at the Land Use Development Management Act, that all cities have to use that process, it spells out, here are the purposes of this code, and it's silent on housing, okay? Recommendation 1.3, with information gathered from strategic planning, the legislature should consider the range of state level policy options presented in this chapter to create a program to set and manage state level housing production targets. It was through this section that they talked about these state level housing production targets that have existed in other states. And, you know, we did not use the word oppose, we used the word cautions, because targets should recognize what government controls and does not control. But the counter argument that the auditors were making yesterday is, if you don't know what the target is, how do you know if you've been successful? And so there's merit to that consideration, but you can see our written response. Recommendation 2.1, legislature should consider whether to expand the Moderate Income Housing Plan MIHP requirements to include forecasting benchmarks for household growth. This is trying to make MIHPs more meaningful and bring in a data point that currently is not required, but to require cities to consider what the population growth could be in your city and have that be part of the target for how you're planning for moderate income housing. Recommendation 2.2, legislature should consider options to increase zoning density on a wide scale within the state. If this, one can look at this and say this feels like a state mandate for zoning, for upzoning. That's some of the reference that they have from other states. I do want to make it clear that for those who were not in the meeting yesterday, that I thought the auditors were incredibly collaborative in their tone, in their presentation, and pointed out that the only way to solve the housing challenges for all stakeholders to work together, state and local governments needed to be a partner. That was a theme they brought up several times yesterday. Part of our response has been zoning density is already increasing in many places around the state.
Can I ask a technical question
Yep.
about Slido?
Uh-huh.
On our phones, it says, please list the audit recommendations in order of most concerning. So most concerning at the top, least concerning on the bottom.
Yes.
And here it says most concerning on the top, least concerning on the bottom.
Is that what you just said?
Most concerning.
The top,
Yeah.
Top,
most
okay.
at the bottom, yeah.
I'm sorry, I was reading it as reverse, so
Okay.
now I had to re-rate my options.
No, that's
I'm
fine.
gonna help you on the backside.
No, that's why, that's where I leave it open. Okay, recommendation 2.3.
Just let me help.
No.
Recommendation 2.3, the legislature should consider policy options to craft additional penalties and incentives associated with housing plans and target. This is a tactic being used in multiple states, just in reference to California and Oregon. In our response, we talk about what's already in Utah law around incentives and consequences. But they focused a lot of time on recommendation 2.2 and 2.3. Recommendation 3.1, as part of any statewide housing strategic planning, the legislature should consider metrics to better track both actual and potential housing production. Right now, really the only metrics that exist with any sort of uniformity are building permits and whatever cities report in MIHP. And there's not a lot of consistency there. So it's even hard for our researchers to build a cognizant story around what's happening on the MIHP level beyond simply what strategy items do people choose. One of the metrics, for example, that came up yesterday and has come up really throughout the last month as we've been deliberating with the auditors is the entitled unit number, permits, but also the authorized density. So in other words, there may be 190,000 entitled units, but if those 190,000 entitled units have an average density of 2 units to the acre, is that meeting the need? But if it's 10 units to the acre, is that meeting the need? Like, can we get better data that way? So that was the quick high level of each of the recommendations. What questions does anybody have about the recommendations before everybody takes the time to start responding to the Slido? Any questions from the board or clarifications? Okay, not hearing any, we're gonna just have some awkward radio silence here to give people a chance. Currently 5 people have done it. So we'll give you a moment here to rank them, and then we'll talk through what's on the screen.
Could have piped in some hold music if I don't know. With a Jeopardy song.
So we're about halfway there, board members who submitted your responses.
Pam, can you scroll up so we can see the bottom?
Yep. Well, I can't, but Nick can.
Nick, sorry.
Carson can.
Carson can. Carson was stuck in a committee hearing until 5 minutes before board meeting, so he's still at the Capitol. The rest of us raced down here so we could have the big screen. So we're about 2/3 of the way through, board members.
I think one other piece of context I will add is the legislative audit committee, while they make the recommendation, they then forward it on to other committees to be the committees to deal with the recommendation. So it was recommended or forwarded to the political subdivisions committee, which did not do anything with it this morning. They didn't even have another hearing on it, and the economic development committee, which will have a hearing on it this afternoon. But to this point, now it could happen this afternoon. No bill files have been opened on any of these specific things. So once we see any legislation come out of these specifically, obviously we'll come back and take positions and go through the normal process. But none of these recommendations in and of themselves trigger any legislative action.
And while people are still putting their votes or their responses in, I felt like as I was ranking that I really had 3 that I was really worried about, 1 that I was kind of worried about, and then 3 that, even though my order is 5, 6, and 7, they're really all 7s.
Right.
And so, and I think my order is lining up with the top 4 in the same order as they come out. So I'm guessing that others have similar feelings, like these 3 or 4 are really the ones that are a focus. Is that how you see it?
Yeah, I said I'm glad you raised that, because that's what we're observing here too. So looks like, let's just start talking through what we've got here. So Carson, can you go down at the bottom? We're waiting on, I think, one more board member, but let's just keep going. Okay, so at the bottom, this would be least concerning at the bottom, would be improving the metrics around actual and potential housing. The second least concerning would be to amend LUDMA to emphasize, Mayor Jessup, we see you and we'll record you accordingly. Then the third least concerning, I need to go see it, sorry. Third least concerning is the strategic plan. And then it looks like those 3 have clumped together. And then, Carson, can you go up? Then it looks like number 4 is kind of in the middle of whether to expand MIHB to include the population forecasting benchmarks. And then it looks like 2 and 3 are clustering together, which is additional penalties as well as the state targets. And then clumping on its own, and my hunch is probably everybody put it at a 7 based on that score, would be the state increasing zoning density widely around Utah. So as quick staff review it that way, that's how it looks like it's categorizing. Councilmember McKay, your thoughts?
Thank you. I was just going to make the comment. It's so interesting. My husband and I just made an offer on some property and we're trying to get the numbers to work. And as we've got estimates, like if it costs $150 a square foot in Salt Lake County to build, and then you add in the price of housing, and then you add in the interest rates, we can hardly get anything to pencil before we even consider taking it to the city council or taking it, to a municipal government to look at the zoning. And so I don't know. I read through these and it would be great if the state or a municipal could fix the problem. But the free market, kind of the problems that are out there, it is, I don't know. I'm just struggling with, I don't feel like it can be fixed on a big scale by elected officials unless they were able to, to help with the cost of building supplies, or, what people are charging for land and things like that. But also, I feel like so many people that are running within our city are saying, I'm so opposed to high density housing. I don't know. It's the age old problem of how do you get council members and the public willing to consider some higher density so that hopefully something could pencil. And so I don't know. I just read through these and am left feeling like I don't know. I don't know what the answers are, but
No, Councilman, you're spot on, and the themes you just referenced are part of the written response that we provided, and I want to pivot to the governor's concepts, because they are trying to step into the role that you were just describing. Like, how are we supposed to fix some of these pieces? Before I make that pivot, Mayor Peterson, I see that you've got your hand raised. So Mayor Peterson.
Yeah, I guess just another thing that I'd add to that is that I think what makes me nervous as a mayor of a town of 12,000 is that there's not a one size fits all application for all of this. So when we're talking about statewide policies that we're implementing, there are things that will work in Salt Lake and probably should happen that won't work in North Logan. And so I would just say, can we consider not the state as a whole? I know that that's what the legislature is about, but I think we run into that all the time where we have things that just don't apply to a mid-sized city.
Yep, excellent point. And part of our written response referenced the problems with the one size fits all approach. So we have 14 minutes before we need to head back to the Capitol. We do need to get to the governor's proposal. And I have 3 hands raised. So let's go Councilmember Dugan, Councilmember Winch, and then Councilmember Malkovich. But my request is make it quick so we can pivot to the governor.
Thanks, Cameron. Thanks for this. I'm just looking at recommendation 1.3 about the targets. And it really doesn't, these are production targets, maybe not affordability targets. And our concern is not just overall numbers, but the affordability numbers. And we have targets on different sides, 30%, 50%, 80% AMI. And if you're going to have targets and it's just on production, we could be building the wrong things because the incentive is to build, but not build at the right levels that we all need. And our needs are going to be different from Bluffdale's needs, different from, smaller towns' needs. So we need to really be concerned about that.
Yep, agreed. And the affordable home ownership is one of the themes from our written responses. What does success actually look like in this space? Councilmember Winch.
I just wanted to echo what has already been said about one size misfits all. If it doesn't fit North Logan with 12,000, it fits even less for communities of 3,000 and less. And so I think they need to be aware of how it affects rural areas, and that doesn't seem to have been addressed at all. Also, I'd like to see how they're going to incorporate in any of these decisions what's happening with Airbnb and other short-term rentals, because the state's been very protective of that. And I think a lot of the housing challenges right now are due to lack of buildings that can be owned, lack of housing that can be owned. It's being turned into either short-term rentals or long-term rentals.
Yep, and thank you, Councilmember. And our written response references both of those points of focus needs to be on owner-occupied homes, and that's where the governor's at. And then we also provided data around short-term rental expansion in the state. Councilmember Malkovich, and then we got to pivot to the governor.
Just real quick. So I went to a planning commission meeting the other day for a city outside of, not my city, but another city who asked me to come and just watch. It was interesting as they brought up concerns that they have with the development plan that was before them. They still passed it because they said they were fearful of the state. They were fearful of what was going to be happening, and they didn't want to make a mistake. And smaller cities who don't have legal counsel in-house don't have anyone to ask. I mean, we have our attorneys, yes, and we appreciate that. But I'm worried that our smaller cities are going to start making and passing things that they don't feel comfortable with because they think the state is going to have some sort of adverse reaction if they don't. There's this unwritten threat, even though it's not the roads and it's not all of those things. They felt like that's what they expressed to the public. We hear your concerns, we have concerns, but we have to do this. And I don't think that's good planning anywhere.
Right.
And I think that needs to be, you know, where that lack of confidence comes in what we used to have on a local level, a confidence in our community and what that means and what growth means, I think is waning. And I don't want, it's not a fight, but it's that ability to have some local say in what you're doing.
Well, yes. I mean, I do think that the concern that those planning commissioners have is founded, because that's why we've been warning for a month that this audit is going to reignite the passions at the Capitol. But I think the silver lining is that we have written down the playbook. Like everything that has been brought up in this meeting is in our written response. And so you need to review the written response and share it with your colleagues, and more importantly, share it with legislators so that they understand what we're already doing. That being said, there are pieces out of the audit that could be improvements to the status quo. And what I'm seeing from the Slido responses is that there is some space on some of the recommendations, or if we could get the details right, it could be an improvement over the status quo. We do have to get to the mayor. The governor is expecting an answer at 8 a.m. tomorrow. So Mayor Walker, very last comment on this.
I just wanted to say nothing important other than there's nothing like a small government Republican to fix the world. Nothing like it. I've never seen anything like it. I can't believe we cities are the bastion of free market, talking about economics, and our legislature, which is supposedly small government centered, best managed, is copying California and Oregon.
Yeah. Well, to be clear, there is no bill to do that yet. The audit looked at those other states, and this is the pivot now to Governor Cox's initiative. So we mentioned it LPC, but Justin and I met with the governor and a few others Friday morning, and the governor told us that he didn't think that the Commission on Housing Affordability recommendations were going to move the needle enough for starter homes in particular, and said, I want to make everybody stretch, developers, local governments, everyone, in order to facilitate more starter homes. He also wants that if local government has to stretch, that the developers then have a guaranteed outcome of building that product. So the next month, he will be releasing his budget document, and he is planning to request from the legislature a historic amount of money that will help with first-time homeowners and will help with some of the infrastructure challenges that local governments are facing. But he also wants, as part of the budget piece, he wants to figure out what can we collectively do to stretch to facilitate more starter homes. So the governor's team since Friday has been working on some concepts. The concepts are not yet ready for prime time, but we're part of the small, Justin and me are part of the small working group to try to devise a strategy that could be incentive-based for local governments and developers, or it could be a mandate on local governments and developers. Certainly the California approach is more mandate. Our preference is always more the incentive-based, and we told the governor face-to-face on Friday that board principles dictated that we wanted policies that resulted in affordable homeownership. And if that meant that we had to stretch on our end, we were willing to do that if the outcome was more affordable homeownership, fiscally sustainable infrastructure, and quality of life. So we've been reiterating those board principles. They're also throughout our written response to the audit. So that being said, some of the dialogue with the governor and his team has been, he wants to have a big ticket target number of new starter homes that are produced over the next few years that he would then challenge local governments to plan for and developers to build. He recognizes all of the economic challenges right now and all of the headwinds. But he said, like, how do we get everybody on the same page of that's the goal? His initial preference was that they'd be single family detached. As we've gone back and forth with him and his team, we pointed out that a key strategy to accommodate growth is Wasatch Choice and centers and condominiums or other types of owner occupied units may fit better than single family detached. And so it all needs to be part of that solution. But yeah, so we've had good discussions about deed restrictions. We've had discussions about short-term rentals. We don't have a specific proposal yet, but those are some of the concepts that we've been talking through, is that cities would either be incentivized or required to plan for certain housing outcomes, and developers would be required to meet those outcomes, and then the state would provide state dollars to bridge the gap for developers and for local governments. Again, specific details are still being debated.
Kim,
So,
what does the governor think about how many entitled lots there
Yeah,
are
so
that are built?
yeah,
That's a
yeah.
question, because if
So
we're.
let me address that, because we're running short on time. So one of the conversations we had yesterday with the governor's staff was how to essentially give credit in these metrics that we need to devise for the communities that have zoned for and entitled a bunch of units that would meet that type of definition. And so figuring out what that looks like, so that if a city is zoned for a significant amount of these types of housing units, they don't have to go out and essentially double it, right? They either have it or it already exists in their cities. Really, here's the bottom line for us as an organization right now, is we do have a lot of cities that have good stories to tell, and we've highlighted those for the last while. We have some cities that do not have a good story to tell because they have not been planning for the housing units, and those are the ones that we're being pushed on. Like one of the comments a legislator said to me in the last few days is, why does the league continue to defend bad cities? And our response is because the solutions you offer hurt all cities rather than being more nuanced. That's where these metrics could potentially come in, is if you have more tightly defined metrics of what success is, then it does start to better define what cities are doing their part and what cities aren't, with, again, the caveat that those metrics need to recognize the local conditions on the ground, need to recognize different regions of the state, need to recognize infrastructure, et cetera, et cetera. So with that being said, I'm going to pause, because what we plan to relay back to the governor tomorrow, we've now told you about his vision of what he's hoping to accomplish on the policy space. He's planning to unveil a huge financial ask that would be tied to state infrastructure bank and others. The board has already endorsed the UEOC concept on the infrastructure bank. His would be bigger than that. So we are planning to tell the governor, yes, we are supportive of that concept. The second piece is support of the concept if it's tied to certain benchmarks, both on the actual developer side and on the city zoning side. Our recommendation to staff is that, yes, we should go down that path of trying to get the metrics in a place that makes sense to everybody, that respects our core principles, but helps better identify what the solution is and when we know we've been successful. And based on the Slido results from the recommendations, it seemed like, people were more comfortable with the strategic plan. Carson, actually, can you bring those metrics back up, or can you bring the Slido back up one more time, the results, so that we can refer back to them here?
Yes.
Perfect. So it says, again, the metric, we close that box. The metrics emphasizing housing, strategic plan, and the MIHP requirements, all of those kind of fit in this space. So the question for the board is, are you comfortable with us proceeding with numbers 4, 5, 6, and 7, working with the governor on his starter home initiative and see if we can figure out something that is consistent with our board principles of outcomes of affordability, home ownership, sustainable infrastructure, and quality of life. So that's the question for the board.
We don't have a Slido on this one, so.
Just answer yes.
I already, yeah, a motion for lead staff to proceed that way.
I'll make a motion for this lead staff to proceed this way based upon the survey results.
That's from Mayor Tran. Councilmember Malkovich seconds it. So Mayor Kafusi, Mayor Tran made the motion, Councilmember Malkovich seconded it, so it's open for discussion.
All right, is there any discussion on the motion?
For excuse me, the bottom 4 and what you've discussed about the governor's proposal.
Yeah, so it'd be bottom 4. Carson, can you scan up so we can see what's not in the bottom 4? Yeah, so right, we have supported begrudgingly additional penalties and incentives, but based on the survey results, that looks like it's in a different cluster than the other 4. So we'd start with what's listed. So it'd be recommendation 2.1. Carson, can you scan down? Working through recommendations 2.1, 1.1, 1.2, and 3.1. And then
working.
Can I ask about 2.1? So changes to the moderate income housing plan. I mean, those have been, your comments outline it. These have been a challenge to have every year have it move and have our staff try to do those things. So, what are your thoughts? Wait, what do you think you'll be pitching to the governor as that discussion rolls out on the moderate income housing plan? That's not going to add a ton of burden and cost and just unattainable documents that our cities can't meet.
I'll take the first crack at that. The database, DWS references it in their response letter. We mentioned it at LPC on Monday. There will be a state housing database that goes live next month. And that, if you go to DWS's letter on the database, it's the last page of the audit. I'll read it word for word. In upcoming months, the department, in partnership with Gardner Policy Institute, will release a database that provides population growth and housing deficit projections for municipalities with a population of at least 5,000. This data, paired with infrastructure, natural resource, and land availability data, will provide the foundation for a statewide and local strategic plan. So where I see the MIHP coming into place is if you have a strategic plan where we're better defining metrics, then the MIHP is going to be tied to those metrics, which could include the forecasting benchmarks for household growth, but it could include other things. But that's really MIHP is really the mechanism at the local level to plug into the recommendations around the state strategic plan on housing and the better metrics. So will it require more work of local planners? Likely. Are we aware of the frustration at every city hall about MIHP? You bet.
Well, I'm also just worried about forecasting things. So if Cameron City, because we know they suck.
Always a problem.
Cameron City, if Cameron City puts in their moderate income housing plan, they're forecasting that they're going to have, growth of a certain amount, and this is how they're going to achieve it based on this database. So few of the levers are in our hands with the market, with labor, with available land. I mean, you'd almost be in some established cities asking people to tear down existing single family homes in order to try and find some of these things to then hit what you have forecasted a benchmark. I'm worried we're putting those things in and then we're going to be held to these things that are they're not actually attainable benchmarks.
Yeah, that wholeheartedly agree. And one of the themes in our written response is we should only have metrics based on what we can control, right? And that's a fundamental problem in my mind with the California model, is the California model has said, Cameron City, you have to produce 1,000 units a year. And Cameron City just can't do that. But a metric that says Cameron City, your population is going to increase by 1,000 people annually, which is X number of households. Are you planning for those households. It's actually, yes, we have rezoned this area that would accommodate this many new households, but the market is doing nothing on it. You know, now you're getting to what is the market responsible for? What are we responsible for? And that's been one of our key themes throughout. So I think the metrics could actually help us better articulate that narrative of there are things that we just can't control. And to the credit of President Adams and Speaker Wilson, well, Speaker Wilson for another 4 hours, they both spoke up yesterday and acknowledged that cities play a part, but it's only one part and there are lots of other pieces. So and the audit recognizes that too.
Real quick, I just want to
The
know.
audit is up in committee in 11 minutes.
Mayor Shepherd or Mayor Walker's idea of if we zone smaller or family homes, that the city should be, I mean, maybe be able to say, because of this lot size, this is the size, you know, this square foot or less to be built on
I
that?
will say that was part of the discussion with the governor, that if we're going to plan for and zone for these type of units, we need to figure out the tools that allow us to make sure that those are built.
Okay.
So it hasn't been a legislative discussion, but that is part of the discussion we've had with the governor's office.
Okay, because I think that's an important aspect that we don't control what they build.
Yep.
And then we get in trouble.
Well, and that's part of the governor has told us, and he's told the developer representatives, I want a guaranteed outcome of starter. So if the cities do their part, you need to do your part. But we haven't defined exactly what it is. And what we're asking for today, as part of this motion with these, items 4, 5, 6, and 7, is for you to authorize us to basically further engage in this conversation. Because the governor wants to bring the lead officers in the next few weeks and try to hammer this out. But there's a lot of legwork we have to do between now and then. Mayor Walker, and the audit is in committee in 9 minutes.
Just to keep the focus on, the issue of being able to make starter homes or ownership available, because all this stuff is just all it's done the last 5-6 years is driven rentals, which, is not the American dream, is not, the opportunity for people to get a leg up. So I just want to keep that focus, because the governor's office was receptive. So was Schultz when we talked to him. But if we're going to copy California, I mean, I don't want to copy them like that either. I'd like to make sure we have something people can own.
Yep, that's absolutely part of the discussion.
Since the government's going to solve this damn problem, we ought to solve it that way.
Yeah, there you go, Mayor. Okay. No, we have a motion on the table.
What's the other motion? Can I attempt to restate that motion, so I have it for the
Yeah, will
minutes?
you restate it, Mayor Kafusi?
So the motion, as I understand it, is to give staff direction to engage in the conversation around recommendations we'll worry about the order later, but 1.1, 1.2, 2.1, and 3.1. And the governor's, what are we calling that?
The governor's initiative on starter homes, and then Councilmember Dugan just pointed out, the definition of starter homes has to be broad to recognize the different needs of different communities. So Dan, I want to make sure you knew we saw that. And Mayor Kafusi, I'm going to include that as part of the motion, because it gets to that starter home initiative, and then making sure that as we negotiate these items in the audit and the governor's piece, we're doing it consistently with those board principles around affordable home ownership, sustainable infrastructure, and quality of life.
So will you say that as a motion?
I just did. We got to go.
Okay, first, second, now let's go. Yeah.
All right, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion carries. All right, I'll call for a motion to adjourn.
Moved.
So moved.
All right.
Second. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you in December. We've had some other items that we will send in an email prior to the December meeting. Thanks, everybody.